All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. It's nice and bright here in Northwest Germany, so thank goodness for the flowers to spice things up a bit. My name is Sarah Archer, and I am the VP of Sales at ChartMogul, and I am joined by some esteemed panelists who are going to share their fantastic insights on location, 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 because that's what it's all about. So here we're going to talk about making business decisions around globalization or localization. And as we're 3 minutes into the hour, I think we should just get started. Let's start with a round of introductions, and then we'll go into the traditional Chart Mogul panel style of Q&A, where we'll ask these smart folks some questions about their experiences and insights, and leave you with some cool things to chew on. So, Francis, I have you top left. So would you kindly introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Francis, co-founder, CPO at Mad Kudu. I've been fortunate enough to work with like a few international companies. So Mad Kudu, we have our tech offices in Paris, and then all of the go-to-market is in the US. My previous company, we had tech offices in Turkey and business offices in England, and we were primarily based in the US. So super excited to share some of the learnings that I've had over the years, and also learnings from customers I work with that have been expanding globally.
Wonderful. Wonderful. ChartMogul is, I did the math on this. I looked to see that we're in 187 countries. We've got an office in Seoul, Korea, in Canada, and in Berlin. And so we're kind of a cool amalgamation, much like your experience. So I think we'll have plenty to talk about. Robert, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, Rob Kaminsky, one of the co-founders of Fletch PMM, and we're a product marketing consultancy. And so our whole business is helping primarily startups position their products, explain their product's value to different market segments, which includes international markets. And so far, about pretty close to 400 B2B startups have gone through our process. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. Where are you based?
I'm based down in Austin, Texas here, stateside.
Okay, fabulous. Jesse, is Austin, Texas the last place I saw you? Did we have margaritas?
I think so. Yeah, this was like last year, March, no?
Indeed it was.
Yeah, it was
I love it.
Yeah.
You'll have to let me know next time you're in town. We'll share in the margaritas.
No doubt. The waiter came around and said, "What would you like to drink?" I said, "I'll have a margarita." And I didn't know there were so many kinds. So I felt foolish because there's all different kinds of margaritas. So Jesse and I will prepare accordingly. And then Rob, maybe you can school us on the local niceties that Austin.
I got you. For sure.
Yeah, that's true. But we are very spoiled because we went to such a beautiful restaurant, right, Sarah? It was a wonderful evening.
It was cool. Well, for the audience, tell us about your background, because I'm lucky enough to know you, but some folks on the call might not.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. I'm Jessie, the co-founder of Loyi, and we help other companies faster target their markets. So we help them with account research and really understanding who to go after and why. So I think that's why I'm joining here the panel. I'm a financial economist. I did my PhD in finance and studied computer science. And my second startup was a fintech. And I was very overwhelmed with exactly the question, like, who to target, which markets, who would be open to buy my product. So I wish I would know Robert before. Because that company is now in liquidation, but this company arose. And yeah, we work with companies starting Series A that do have like the difficulties figure out like which market to go after, which regions. And yeah, super happy to be on the panel and hear more from the others and share our experiences.
Grand. Well, I appreciate you all introducing yourself and sharing some details about your backgrounds. That's helpful context as we jump into our questions here. So it's very orderly of me, I guess, to posit this question toward you, Francis. But maybe if you would be so kind to start us out, can you talk to us about how do you know if a product or a business is ready to enter a new market, is ready to sell and service customers in a new location? What are the requirements?
Yeah, love the question. And I think I'll have to separate like when a product is ready from when a company is ready. I do think the one comes before the other. I think the typical sign is organic traction. think one of the things that you want to look for is getting that kind of pull from the local market that'll tell you that it's ready. I guess the two things I would look for to determine that the company is ready to enter that location is, one, really from a demand perspective, getting to the point where organic demand exceeds your team's capacity to handle that demand from another geography. So something that we've done in the past is we would have reps, even in California, manage demand from Europe. Like the coverage is not that great from a time zone perspective, but once you get to the point where it's not manageable and they're getting too many calls in the morning, that's when you start thinking like, well, either we open New York office or we consider going to Europe. But until you've maxed out your capacity, I would say you're not ready. So that's kind of a demand perspective of it. And then there's a more internal element, which is the operational efficiency. I think expanding globally puts a massive strain on the organization. And I think you need to have a really, really solid operational foundation to expand somewhere else, because it's going to be really difficult to open offices, to set up all the processes. And if they're not running extremely smoothly in the original office, it's just going to break when you move to the new geography.
Yeah, fair. I've experienced a version of that firsthand. My last startup opened an office in New York City, very likely prematurely. I think we were excited by demand and appetite from big agencies and brands in the city that wanted to do business with us. But we definitely stretched ourselves too thin too soon. So maybe just a follow-up question. You've mentioned, opening an office. So do you have any thoughts on, hiring 1 to 2 boots on the ground, maybe in a freelance or a testing capacity versus opening an office? What might you have to say there?
I think the first few employees are really, really critical. And I would not go down the freelance route, because I think they need to be people that have really good knowledge of the local market and are going to be super scrappy and able to build something from scratch, right? Because they're going to have to deal with all the legal admin stuff locally. They're going to have to figure out all the things that are different about your location. I mean, we're an American company, but like whenever we sell into Europe, initially like all the GDPR stuff, like the way even like Germany is very specific about this. Like when you sell to German clients, like their view on privacy is incredibly different from the view of American companies on privacy. And so that person that like the first boots on the ground, they need to be trailblazers. That needs to be core to their DNA. And they, to some extent, have to be in it for the long run, because the first few months are not going to be fun. Sure, there is demand, but it's not just going to be rosy. Oh, we just like take in the demand and convert it into money. There's going to be a lot of figuring things out. And so I think once you decide to go into that new geography, it is a substantial investment. And you have to understand it's like launching a new product line or launching a new go-to-market motion. It is going to take a substantial amount of time, effort, and it's going to be a distraction to the rest of the business, which is why I was saying like operational efficiency is critical on the main location. Otherwise, it'll fail, and generally it'll fail kind of miserably, in a sense that everybody's miserable, and it's not like a big explosion or implosion. It's just like a slow fickle, where it's just like it's not really working, and it's just it's rough. And I think I know we talked about this with Rob initially, but I feel it's very similar to when companies try to go after a new ICP or try to launch go after a new market, even in their same geography. That alone is hard. So imagine now layering on another complexity, which is localization, like different culture, different admin. I think it's that one's really hard.
Crazy. Okay, well, we do have Jesse here on the call, who is in New York, but originally from Germany. So, you're kind of doing it yourself, the boots on the ground, but the whole hog experience. So what's your reaction to what Francis said? Do you have anything else to add?
I found it very interesting what he's saying, and I think when you open an office, you already have like super strong conviction and maybe a big customer group already in that region. I come in a little bit earlier, I would say, in that process. So first of all, from like we are an early stage company, we decided like after my experience with Germany and how difficult it is, with privacy and regulation with a fintech, I decided with this company to go directly to the US. And I thought, okay, if you start from scratch somewhere, it will be easier. But no, my DNA is still European. So selling to the US and building up a go-to-market motion here as a founder was not as easy as I originally expected. So I just can envision, like, when you then as a larger company, what Francis is saying, decide to go to the US from Europe, you really need people who are as committed like co-founders, because I think, and that bring the experience for this market to the table, because otherwise I think I've seen there is like an accelerator program, it's called Start 2 Group, that helps a lot of European companies with market access to the US. And these companies are already successful in Europe, like making 1 to 10 let's say like 10 million ARR. And then they decide, okay, hey, we have a lot of customers in the US, let's go. And very few of them succeed because they just try to replicate what they did in the European market in the US market, and it usually doesn't work. And that's what Francis was saying, right? That you have to treat it completely separately with the expertise. You even might change your value prop. And I think Robert can talk about this, like talking about product market fit. The same product does sell differently in different markets. And a good example, a positive example of a company that made it in the US was Celonis, one of Germany's most successful organizations. They came to the US, started off the ground, put a lot of resources in, opened offices, and succeeded. And what I know from the team is, they went all in, like all their efforts went into that market. But that's Europe, US, right? Like we have within Europe also internationalization, which is like a different piece of cookie, I would say, and comes with similar but other challenges. And happy to share more about it later, but would love to hear also Robert's opinion.
Yeah,
sure.
Robert, tell us.
I won't go too deep because honestly, Francis and Jesse kind of nailed it. But to just kind of echo like the key points, you got to be having some success where you are locally, and then really ask yourself, why are we moving international? And what we've seen working with a bunch of startups is there's usually two drivers. One truly is like, oh, there's this growth opportunity. Sometimes it's, oh no, nothing's working here locally, and we always challenge that a bit. It should be not for your desires. And what I like, Francis hit on this, you should almost be being pulled into these markets. You should have some logos there. It should feel almost natural. And you should prepare yourself not for, and Jesse, you just hit this, not for rinse, repeat the playbook that's working. You should be ready to go rebuild a new playbook, because that's what it's going to take. And so no freelancers, almost think in some areas, depends on the business, the founders themselves actually need to be the ones to go build that out, or at least you need to hire someone that you're going to give the agency of a founder to go figure out what that actually looks like for the market. Those are the big points.
Interesting. Practically speaking, maybe one follow-up question is like, okay, so I know I can't deploy the same playbook in different geographies, and I need people that are committed to maybe suffer for some period of time, based on what Francis said. How do you practically, manage separate playbooks with maybe separate messaging, or any thoughts on that from your experience, Rob?
Yeah, the short answer is you got to separate them. Unless you have extremely talented team that can like split their focus and execute two things well, which to be honest, I've just never really seen this. There's like a few maybe exceptions that come to mind. Okay. But you got to separate it. And you got to give someone ownership over those pieces for how they're going to go find fit, develop the messaging, run the programs, figure out the tactics, and then potentially even being boots on the ground. So long-winded way of saying, keep them separate. They're just going to be you're almost running two businesses with two different products is a good way to think about it.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Although, and Francis, maybe you can speak to this. My follow-up question is like, okay, separate playbooks make sense because they are kind of like independent businesses, but they also have to speak to the same vision. of what it is your company is trying to do. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, okay, well, the day-to-day and the way in which we market to and acquire and service customers has some regional differences, but at the same day, we're all part of Mad Kudu or Chartmogul or whatever the case might be. So I'm curious if you've got any ideas for me there.
I think that one is, and I think Jesse touched a tiny bit on this. I think the value you deliver, the ultimate value you deliver to the customer might be the same, but the way you position it might have to change. And I'll take like a pretty big example of this, like, and this is like dear to my heart because it's a French company called Decathlon. They're like I guess like a low cost REI, you could consider them. They're a religion in France. Like as kids, we all grow up with only stuff from that brand because their mission is to make every sport accessible to everyone. So the idea is that they want to produce like relatively high quality equipment, but make it cheap so that anyone can play any sport.
Mm-hmm.
And it's huge in Europe. It's pretty big in some Asian countries. And so they tried to come to the US for the first time in the 90s, complete fail. They tried to come again to the US in the early 2020s. So they opened a small store in San Francisco. It kind of worked. It was small enough that it was basically only attracting Europeans who knew about it. And then they opened like a big store. The opening worked well. And then they opened a second store and it completely failed. And one of the reasons why it failed is that their messaging didn't resonate with Californians. Like people go to REI because there is a bit of a symbol of wearing, like an Arc'teryx jacket. Like people like, oh yeah, like this jacket is like super expensive, which means it's high quality. People don't recognize the idea of like something can be cheap and high quality. Like the status isn't there. And I think they really failed to change their positioning and potentially say, hey, we actually do hardcore R&D to make really high quality things at a lower price, but emphasis on the R&D that they do themselves, like the innovation that they have, like a 2-second tent, we just like throw the tent in the air and it unfolds and it's ready to sleep in. Like they have amazing things, but they tried to apply the French playbook on the US market and it completely failed. They shut down their 2 stores. And now what's interesting is that they're now reselling through Target and Walmart because they realize that those companies have a similar positioning of trying to make products available at a relatively cheap price. And I think that maybe will work, but there's a question of how it's going to hurt their brand because they're putting the emphasis on the low cost rather than on the high quality internal R&D. So I think I will say at the end, like the value delivered to the customer is probably going to be the same, but you have to accept that you might have to position it differently and learn to not be in love with the way you've positioned and succeeded in your original market. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do for a founder, which is why I'm not sure having a founder go to the new geography is the right play, but rather have someone who knows the local geography take on that kind of founder role because he knows what's going to resonate with the people and how to align that positioning with the value that the products deliver.
Super interesting. Love that example. I know the store very well out of Germany.
Me too. Everything I wore on the last 2 Caminos that I did, I butcher it, decathlon.
Yeah.
Rob, it looked like you had a visceral reaction to something.
Yeah. So I have probably a pretty unpopular opinion on the question I love is like, what about the vision? How do you tie them together? For most markets, your vision does not matter as much. So setting aside, and there are companies that sell, their core value proposition is very either philanthropic or very vision oriented. You think like solar energy style companies, or I think of like Tom's Shoes, where there's this give back mechanic. And Francis' story is perfect, is like folks in other regions aren't going to care about, the French give back and the vision and the sports. It's like, we don't give a shit about French sports, right? Like I'm in a different country. I care about like, English soccer and all these things. And so we get tied up into this vision piece, and it's not that it's not important. That stuff's more important usually for early adopters, for venture capitalists and investors, and for employees to be a part of something. So you need to monitor that. But expanding internationally, like trying to lean into the vision is just, I don't think it's that important.
Well, fair. In sales, we say all money's green.
Yeah.
Everywhere and all money's green. So I guess you have to maintain some of your business identity, but in terms of acquiring customers in different geographies, like let's just deliver the market with a product that delivers on its promise, and try to snowball this effect of happy customers.
Yeah, what helped me, and I actually had a LinkedIn post about it yesterday and started discussing about this. There is a book called Competing Against Luck. I don't know if you heard about it. And it talks about, okay, what's the job to be done here with your product? In Europe, the job to be done is, okay, help people, go to a hike, even though they don't have like money for the super expensive equipment. Yeah. But the job to be done completely changes for like these Californians, right? They can go to on a hike with any gear basically, because the mountains are around the corner. I don't know. And that's something that we should really focus on, like, what's the job to be done with the product to solve for. And this will help a lot of messaging, I guess, and targeting, what Robert is an expert on. But we had one company that wanted to understand, okay, what's the job to be done in those countries? And it was like, I think, a European expansion. So they started off in Germany and then wanted to go to like different markets. And they were thinking, okay, what is like the best next market? And they looked at kind of their customer base, and it was like roughly similar. So, that wasn't very informative. So they used our tool. They get a list, a TAM, like the total market within each country. And they asked, like, okay, what were the top 3 jobs that and roles that they were hiring for go-to-market, and what did the sales reps need to do? Was it cold calling? Was it, I don't know, writing email outbound? And then they kind of dissected the market by the job to be done of what their software could be doing, and then they made a decision based out of that. So they literally figured out the job to be done based on the history of job ads in those particular markets, and then made a decision based out of that. And I was like, wow, cool that you can use our tool for that, but I have never thought about it, because different types of companies have different types of processes, and we need to understand also those processes, especially when we are selling B2B SaaS. We need to know what tech stack combos they have. We need to know what they're hiring for, which tasks, which roles, what the goals are.
Yeah, it's interesting. At ChartMogul, we talk a lot about customer segmentation, and we talk about drilling down one layer deep, which is, okay, not just segmenting your customers, but understanding who your customers serve, and then the things they need to do in order to serve those folks. So I think what we're converging on here is that, approaching internet globalization conversation requires quite a lot of introspection, some research and some preparation. So, okay, grand. Well, let's assume for the purpose of this panel that we've managed to find the right markets and start testing them. Practically speaking, I'm curious to understand, okay, you've got these playbooks and they're running. What does it mean for the day-to-day? And so I'd be curious to understand, like, Francis, maybe when you opened offices in different locations, did you think about, changing your approach to sales negotiations or pricing and billing? What kind of, on the ground things did you need to change once you decided to approach a new market?
Yeah, I think almost everything. It's there. Like I like that we talked about. There's like the value proposition, and it's almost more of the kind of like marketing to some extent of like how do you position yourself or your product in this new geography. And then there's a lot of there's like a culture of operations in a new geography that you need to adapt to. The price sensitivity is very different in one country than it can be in another. The way you negotiate is also very different in one place from another. Competition is different. So this applies probably for larger companies, but price points potentially have to be different in one country versus another. Like you can't just like walk into, like, there are not as many scale ups in Europe as there are in the US. If you're selling to scale ups and you're charging them 50 grand a year, your market is tiny, right? So then there's a question of like, well, first off, like, again, like, is this market for you or not? And
Yeah.
then if it is, how do you price? How do you sell? I'll take another analogy on this. So I was talking about Decathlon because, like, in part, I was like a sponsored athlete by Decathlon. I play this like European sport called handball, and we've been trying to bring the sport to the US. And what's interesting is that in Europe, we have the way people get into sports is with their local teams. They play for the village or the city that they live in, and then
Yeah.
like each city plays against one another. And so we tried to replicate the same thing in the US with like all the people that were trying to grow the sport. And so we tried to have like different teams compete with one another. But one of the things that we ended up running into is that people, this is not an American concept. In the US, people play for their high school or their middle school. They play for whatever school they go to, and that's their prime way of doing it. And so then we realized we had to invest into schools and getting schools to play the sport. And then we understood that if you want the, a national team that's going to be solid, you have to figure out how to get colleges to invest, money into athletes that can go through college with a scholarship for this sport. And then you can start building a national team that's going to have some kind of weight. And it was really interesting to think, okay, like even the playbook of how we go from like starting something to having a national team that competes well, we had to take our playbook and kind of scrap it and look at, okay, how does the US actually do it? What's the typical format? And then adapt to that. And I think similarly in B2B, there are ways people operate and are used to operating. And if you try to force your way of doing it, it's just not going to work, or it's going to work a little bit with the people that have the same culture, but there's a high chance that it's going to fail.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that firsthand at ChartMogul, right? So I have a small sales team that sells like all over the world. In fact, our geography split's kind of comical. I have a North American account executive and a rest of world account executive. And so, we have mostly inbound motion and we get leads from all over. And it's an interesting question that I ask myself every couple of quarters is like, okay, well, we're selling in English. Everything's in English. And we're selling like horizontal SaaS, right? And so, I say to myself, should we be localizing some support articles? Should we be trying to do some demos in Spanish? Like, should we test some of these environments? And it's true, Francis, that the customers we convert in the geographies that are good for us in Spanish or in Germany or in Hong Kong, they are closest to us in like mentality and the way in which they operate. So I know for a fact that I am probably leaving money on the table by not tailoring my approach or being more aware of the environment in which there are for sure suitable prospects for us. But we just end up getting those folks that are a bit like ChartMogul, I guess, to begin
Right,
with.
because it would take a substantial effort to, like, you are the product of your environment, like you sell like the person you are. And then if you wanted to cater to the Spanish market, you would probably want to have someone who's like very well versed in sales in Spain. Like what are the do's and don'ts? Because it's very easy to make a big mistake in a different country, right? Like in Europe, at least in France, right? It's you don't, like, if you go out for dinner or something like that, you try to minimize like work talk. I feel like in the US, it's like, if you're not talking about work, like, why are you even talking? And so like there's these like kind of faux pas that you want to avoid. And it's, the best person to know what those are is going to be someone who's local to that culture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the negotiation tactics vary dramatically, just even here in country to country in Western Europe. So it's tricky. I think earlier in my career, I thought, oh, well, you can enter new markets and, you just hire someone that speaks the language, but then you forget that it's documentation. Should the application itself be coded, with UI in a different language? You need the support agents, you need the sales material and the pricing. And so it can get pretty chaotic, pretty fast. Yeah, Robert, I mean, you've worked with lots of different startups. And so I'm curious, like, where have you seen folks go wrong? They've said, okay, we think we want to enter this market. Maybe they have or haven't been as introspective as we'd hope they might. So have you seen any of this go sideways? And can you share,
Oh, yeah.
for guidance?
Yeah, one of the big ones is you brought up segmentation earlier on. And the way we look into segmentation is really like, one, like what's the use case for the product we have? Especially we see this a lot with horizontal products. It's like, oh, great, they're all doing, we'll just use HR management. And in fact, there's this company that comes to mind, very large company, I'm not allowed to use their name, crushing in India. And they were trying to come to the States. And so when we were working with them, and we're working through this exercise, we were trying to unpack like, okay, what makes you valuable? And they're telling us about their customers in India and what they were doing and what they were really competing with. And what we unpacked is like, what they were really competing with was a bunch of manual processes and little point solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like a pretty immature market. And they were like one of the first to get in there. And so they have this very powerful HR platform, and again, crushing. And so they're like, we just need to take this to the States. And then we started to be like, well, okay, like tell us about some of the customers in the States. How did you win them? And guess what? No one had manual processes. They were all using like the Oracles and SAPs of the world with these HR platforms. It's like, okay, well, you know what that means is like your whole value proposition is going to shift now.
Right.
And so like having that awareness is really, really important. And it goes back to what we were saying, like you can't just drop this playbook in, you can't just drop the value prop. You got to go find fit in a whole new way. And then it comes back to like, what do you actually know about that market?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know much, like guess what? You're 0 to 1ing again. Like you got to go find a real opportunity.
Yeah.
And we see this play out with a lot of our clients. There's nothing more painful than this, but it's important to have this awareness is sometimes we'll be segmenting these markets looking for like, where's their opportunity? And we get to this point where it's like, shit, like there isn't really a big problem we can pull on to then even introduce our product.
Yeah.
And this should make you second guess expanding internationally of like, is there even a spot for us to go and do this? And so long story short, for that company we were working with, they did find an angle of differentiation totally different than what they were saying today that got them to these very significant revenue amounts.
Yeah.
It ended up being more of a bottom-up price argument that they would never think of using locally where they were at. And so this is just another thing of like, even if the product works the exact same, what you compete with and the perception that that audience has drives everything that you're going to do tactically, channels, and value prop wise.
That's definitely been my experience with like launching ChartMogul CRM. So, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, right? Like launching a CRM in 2023. But I have seen like really dramatic regional differences. And so our initial hypothesis was like, oh, ChartMogul CRM will be for B2B SaaS businesses with recurring revenue. And it'll be, you know, a CRM workflow tool, but it'll also be your subscription analytics for SaaS metrics. And so we kind of thought we'll capture founders and founding teams at the time where they don't yet have a CRM. But, you know, similar to the story that you just shared, I think I took 40 calls with CRM prospects in the first week we launched. One was operating out of a spreadsheet. Everybody else was just using, you know, a HubSpot, a Salesforce, because the way in which you get started in the US is like you just do it. Where actually we've had quite a lot of success with the CRM in the Netherlands specifically. And a lot of that seems to be also related to cost and complexity. So folks are like, oh, a CRM seat for $39 and I get SaaS metrics as well. Like that's going to save me considerably versus, you know, implementing HubSpot and having a CRM admin. So
yeah, you talked about tactics too, like approaching a new market. If I was going into a new market, the thing I would do is do a version of segmentation based on what I know, and then treat it like a beachhead or a wedge strategy, just like hopefully you did when you were starting the company. Don't try and go broad. Just be like, where do we think the pain truly is the biggest relative to where our product could be really good? Because if you can't even get that to work, it's like red flag. Like, don't go into these markets that are going to be even harder. And like that's where, like from a testing standpoint, you should begin is just to drastically shrink that market before you even think about expanding beyond the international expansion.
What we always recommend to this point, Robert, is like reverse engineer your ICP. If you have already like 5, you can start with 5 companies that you have in that market, like 5 companies that you think, oh, these are really great customers. You can reverse engineer your ICP and see, okay, what are the characteristics, like the jobs to be done, what were they hiring for, what is their business model, what tech stack are they using, and you get like a really nice set of, okay, what makes this customer a great customer in that market, and
Yeah.
then just map it for the market and do the research. So, how many of those companies that have exactly these characteristics are in that market, and just look at your top 10, top 100, top 1,000 and take it from there.
For sure.
Yeah, I like that. It sort of reminds me of like a sales territory plan. My first territory in sales was shameful. It was like Mississippi, part of Tennessee, and Alabama. I was like, and it's again another story, but like I had a leader who was like, you need to sit down and make a territory plan on how you're going to meet your number like in this geography. And so I had to like map out all the cities, all the companies in the city, and think about, okay, what are the logos I want to try to acquire and how am I going to do that? So I can almost imagine doing that, with a localization approach. And that goes back to the point that you need to hire someone that's going to be really driven and committed to that beachhead strategy, and also starts to develop all of this in-network knowledge that they can use to grow the business. And so 2 or 3 days ago, I saw like a post on LinkedIn about the death of sales territories, and sales territories should be no longer because, we're all online. I'm in Germany, you're in New York, Jesse, but I think having this like fundamental like knowledge of how an area operates is really quite valuable. And sales territories exist for a reason, not just, for time zones. And folks like to do business with people in their backyard. And so when you can have, relationships with people in Boston, you're coming up in conversations. And I think that can have a little bit of a snowball effect. So cool.
I agree. Like we had yesterday our monthly roundtable, and it's so nice to be with the folks on the ground, right? Like it's so nice. And in fact, today I'm like, oh, I have to cold call again. And I'm like, oh, I wish I would be in Europe because, during the day, time zone New York is terrible because I'm booked with meetings, with webinars. And then once I want a cold call, like it's already like everybody's going off work. So, even just from that perspective, like talking about operations, I love to be in Europe because then I can basically have all my focus time during the morning and then start cold calling when everybody here wakes up. And it does make a difference. So I think, territories, we might not need them, but just like from a human aspect, they make sense.
Well, and I think there's a relationship to like how expensive is the thing you're selling. Like if you're selling a low cost thing, like I don't know, Calendly, right? Like I don't need to have teams, country-based teams. Everyone schedules meetings online loosely the same way. And versus, you start moving into enterprise, like it's harder to sell, harder to buy. All those cultural nuanced things become really, really important. So there's probably this like sliding scale as it relates to how local you need to be.
Yeah.
I will say on that one, what's interesting is that I agree on the sell side, but there's like a different part of go-to-market that needs to adapt, right? So if you're doing like more of a transactional sale, like the sales process might be fairly standard, but then like still your marketing has to be different. Right?
And that's
like
fair. Yeah.
And because the marketing is going to have more weight. And I think sometimes we don't know about this because we are local to one geography, but it's really interesting to see in like, even in movies, right? I don't know if like many people know this, but a lot of movies are changed like pretty dramatically based on the country that they're going to be played in. Like a typical movie, like Christmas was not so long ago, so everybody in the US watches Die Hard. So Die Hard, for those who don't know, like the bad guys are German. In Germany, they changed that to say the bad guys were not they were still German, but they were basically freelancers working for the IRA. Because otherwise it would not resonate well with the German market. There's similar things where there's like cartoons where like there's this one cartoon that was like that worked pretty well, like Inside Out, where I think the kid doesn't like to eat broccoli, which resonates really well with the US, but in Japan, broccoli is something that people love. So they actually changed the broccoli to green peppers because otherwise nobody would like relate to the character. So it's actually interesting to see that even like these, blockbuster productions are going through like these minor changes to make sure that they, they're still conveying the same message and they're understanding what the cultural nuances are to adapt to it. So if even those companies are having to do it with like their brand, I think it's important to realize that like we have to do it at our smaller scale when we're trying to enter another geography.
Short follow-up question. when you started to enter new geographies with Madkudo, did you guys figure all these hard things out yourself, or did you ever like hire or bring someone else in to consult you on some of these things? The example you've just given is like really nuanced. I'm sure there's experts that help in this regard, but how did you approach that?
The main thing was finding someone on the ground that had this kind of founder sorry mentality and is able to convey the those nuances, like someone who's going to like really quickly pick up on the fact that, okay, like Matku, like this is what you're selling or this is how you're positioned. FYI, in this market, people want to hear about it this way, or like this is like the competition. I think I loved what Rob was talking about, where in like some geographies can be, oh, well, they have a point solution or they have an Excel spreadsheet. Well, depending on what the norm is, you're going to want to position yourself slightly differently, because saying, oh, we're better than a point solution if people are using spreadsheets doesn't really matter, because like right now it's like free in Excel versus your thing, rather than saying, oh, you're paying like a bad point solution. Why not consolidate everything into ChartMogul, right? So though that's like the main thing that we've done is finding someone. And I will say it is incredibly hard, because you're almost looking for a new founder of the company when you are, multi-million run rate. But you need someone that has that mentality of like building from scratch, like iterating, testing, finding what's going to work. And they have to go through the exploration that you went through as a founder to find your initial product market fit. Like you have to find product market fit in the new geography. Yeah. The only difference is you have a product to sell, which is good and bad at the same time, right? Because you can't adapt the product the same way you did when you found your first product market fit, where it's a product market and fit, right? There's two elements that need to fit, the product and the market. In this case, you're saying we already have the product and now we're trying to force a fit to the market. And the only thing you can do is like how you package the product in your go-to-market motion. I think that's, again, it is incredibly hard because you have less flexibility on how you change the product. And I think a lot of people underestimate the complexity there. I will say every time we've done it, I feel like we could have done it a little bit later. And just my general recommendation for everyone is like, if you don't feel like it's too late for you to move into a new geography, it's probably way too early.
Yeah, cool. I mean, we did it so early at my last startup, and you're right, finding those people was really challenging. Because they also have to do all the logistics of opening a company in a different place. How do you get benefits for people that you hire in New York City? How do you find an office that's affordable in Manhattan that you can get to from the airport? Like there's all of those elements as well that we didn't talk about. And so I very much like the analogy of like, it's like a co-founder like later on, and it's just, it's all a bit crazy, hey?
Yeah, and it all takes so much longer than one would expect.
I know. We need time machines, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. Just add more time to it. What you think it will take, it just add.
And more patience. And I think like what I also heard is a lot of listening. Like, I think it's hard when you have some like confidence and swagger about your business to like enter a new market, and you have to be able to pick up on those signals that you're getting. And I think if you don't have that open-minded approach, then you're not probably getting the data you need to, modulate things effectively. So
I see a big parallel with like the Dunning-Kruger, where, when like people who don't know much think of themselves as experts, and the more you learn, the more you realize you're not an expert. I feel like when you're not in a new market, you see unlimited opportunity. It's like, oh my God, like if we go to the US, like imagine like, where so much money is going to fall from the sky. And that's because you don't know anything about what it is to sell in the US. And then you go to the US, and like the more you try to close deals, the more you realize you don't know how to handle this market. And then you start realizing, oh my God, this is going to be really hard. Then you at some point, hopefully you put enough effort into it that you get to the other side of the Dunning-Kruger, where now like, about this and you can be an expert and it actually works. But that trough of the solution is pretty substantial. And I think, often we close one or two deals in this new geography. And like, oh my God, like if we close 2 deals, we can probably close like 100 more. And well, no, it takes a lot of work to get there, and takes people who know how to close those 100 deals to make it work.
For sure. Grand. Well, this has been fun, dynamic. way to round out the day for me. I'm making cod for dinner, fresh from the market. And I know that this will be summarized into some cool follow-on content. We'll try to organize everything efficiently, and, share a blog post when it's ready. But yeah, feel free to connect with these lovely folks on LinkedIn or wherever you might find them, and reach out to the Chart Mogul team with any specific follow-up questions. Otherwise, I really thank you for your time and the energy invested, and we'll just send you on your merry way.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks all. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Catch you later.
All right. Take care. Cheers.
Bye.